Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree. This is my vlog, and today I'm doing this is going to be a long video. Think about 25 to 30 minutes, because I got a lot to say. This is going to be one of my longer videos. Today I'm talking about my personal journey through the years with Nintendo. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do this is because I often tweet how much I hate Nintendo. And whenever somebody tweets something positive about Nintendo, I usually point out the flaw in the thing that they're liking. Somebody getting excited for Super Mario Brothers 2 being on Switch Online service, I'm like, why are you excited for a 35-year-old game that you already own on the Wii U, that you already own on the Wii, that you can play on your laptop for free, blah 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 blah. I just kind of have it out for Nintendo lately. So I thought I would kind of go over why I feel that way. How I went from loving Nintendo, being a die-hard Nintendo fan, a cheerleader, an apologist, a fangirl, to hating Nintendo. Because there was a time I wore only Nintendo t-shirts. I have a Super Mario Brothers ball cap. I have an NES Remix t-shirt that I got off of the Nintendo website through points I earned by buying Nintendo games. So there was a time when I only watched Nintendo videos on YouTube. And I mean Pat the NES Punk, Angry Video Game Nerd, or Angry Nintendo Nerd, Nintendo, stuff like that. It was literally all I watched on YouTube. And then all of a sudden I went from being indifferent to Nintendo, to not caring about Nintendo, to actively hating Nintendo. So let's talk about it. My journey with Nintendo actually started before the NES. I had an Atari. Technically, I had a machine called the Coleco Gemini, but it was a Coleco knockoff that played Atari cartridges. It was not the conversion cart adapter that you plugged into a ColecoVision. It was a separate machine, so you can Google Coleco Gemini and you can see pictures of it. It was a machine made by Coleco that was literally just an Atari 2600 knockoff. I had on that machine Mario Brothers, Donkey Kong, and Popeye. Those are all made by Nintendo. So my first experiences with Nintendo was there. And then I played Donkey Kong in the arcade, and I played Mario Brothers, the original Mario Brothers, in the arcade, and Popeye in the arcade as well. That's why I bought those cartridges. I wanted my parents to buy me those cartridges because I played them in the arcade. And then in 1988, for Christmas, my parents bought the family an NES. And I emphasize they bought it for the family. It was the one Christmas present we all got. We shared it. We didn't get anything else that year. We didn't get individual presents. We literally just, all of us kids, there were 4 of us, shared the NES as our birthday present. Now, my sister, Becky, she was just born in April that year, and we got it for Christmas. So she was not even a year old yet. She was an infant. But it was still hers, too. My parents did not have a lot of money. My mom worked at a truck stop as a waitress. My dad worked at a factory, but then he ended up quitting his job, and then he started working odd jobs, like working for farmers and as a handyman and just doing odd jobs, temp jobs. So it took him a while to get back on his feet. So we were poor for a while. We went through a big stretch where we did not have money. And during that stretch is when we had the NES. And so we got one game that came with it, Super Mario Brothers Duck Hunt, and then we got used from a video rental store. They had used cartridges in their bin. They were like $10 or something like that, when new cartridges were like $30-40. So it was cheaper. My parents would buy us new games every Christmas. So for about 3 or 4 years, we'd get new games for Christmas. We didn't get them for our birthday because it wasn't our Nintendo. It wasn't my Nintendo. It wasn't Stacy's Nintendo. It wasn't Candy's Nintendo. It wasn't Becky's Nintendo. It was our Nintendo. Even Mom and Dad played it. And then we amassed a small collection, I'd say 10 or so games. Not very many, just about 10 games. We got mostly from thrift stores or yard sales or hand-me-downs, trading with other people. We traded our Atari stuff to this one kid for his Nintendo games, so we got a big chunk of Nintendo games from that trade. My parents were okay with it because, they spent all that money on the Nintendo. They wanted us to get our money's worth. And that kid really wanted an Atari, so there you go. In 1994, okay, let's back it up. In 1991, I went to a friend's house. Okay, we lived in a trailer park. So when I say friend's house, they lived in a camper, and he had a tent set up in his front yard, and he had the Super Nintendo in the tent in his front yard. So I went to my friend's house, air quotes, but it was really just a tent. And he introduced me to the Super NES, and I started playing it. My first impression was not impressed. I was playing arcade games at the time. I was playing Street Fighter. I was playing Mortal Kombat. I was playing Primal Rage. And games like that, NBA Jam, stuff like that. I had moved on beyond Nintendo. I'd lost interest in the NES. I didn't care for Mario anymore. I was never into Donkey Kong. We didn't get Kirby. We just had a bunch of crappy games, like Three Stooges, Friday the 13th, games you've never heard of. I'm not even gonna tell you. Games that I had to look up on on Wikipedia just to know what they were. So we had a lot of crap, not a lot of good games. So I wasn't impressed because it was just Mario with better graphics, and I was like, Another friend invited me to his house, and he had a Sega Genesis, and I was blown. He was playing Sonic the Hedgehog, and that literally blew my mind. So I begged and begged and begged my parents to get a Sega Genesis. So in 1994, for my 12th birthday, when they finally came down enough in price, my parents did buy me a Sega Genesis Model 2 with Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for my birthday, and they were nice enough to get me 3 cartridges that Christmas. The cartridges they got me were Mortal Kombat 1, Mortal Kombat 2, and Shinobi 3, because Mortal Kombat 3 had just come out in arcades. It wasn't on cartridge yet. You couldn't buy it yet. That didn't come out for another few months. So that's what I had. And I loved it. I loved the hell out of it. In 1996, after reading a bunch of magazines, I was dismissive of PlayStation because I'm like, it's Sony. They don't have a mascot. They don't know what they're doing. They're not gonna succeed. Sega Saturn was too expensive and it didn't have any good games. So I was really honed in on Nintendo 64. Even though I had become enamored with the Sega Genesis, I loved it. I had tons and tons of games for the Genesis because this was at the end of its life, so games were used. You could get games pretty cheap. So I was buying tons of games for Genesis, and I loved just about every one of them. Got a couple stinkers here and there, but by and large, I loved them, and I became a Sega fan. My parents wouldn't buy me a 32X because what do you need that for? We just got you the Genesis, blah, blah, blah. They wouldn't buy me a Sega CD because it was too expensive and they didn't understand the technology. They're like, you don't need that. So I got a job. First, I would go knocking on doors. Hey, can I shovel your snow? Can I rake your leaves? Can I mow your lawn? Can I pull weeds out of your garden? Things like that, depending on the season. And I did that for a whole year, literally just saving up my money. I didn't make a lot of money doing that, so I spent it all on toys. I was still really into Transformers action figures at the time, and I was buying a lot of Generation 2 Transformers. But then I got another job, working in a cornfield, detasseling corn in the mornings, and then on weekends and afternoons, I would go throw newspapers at people's houses. So I had 2 jobs. I was 13 years old. I saved up. I had enough money to buy a Nintendo 64. I went to Kmart because we didn't have a Walmart. I went to Kmart. I put down the money. I bought the Nintendo 64. Launch day, I bought Super Mario 64. Got in the car. My dad wanted to make a pit stop at this pawn shop on his way home. So we went to the pawn shop. And long story short, they had a drum set there and a Super Nintendo with a box of Super Nintendo games, a shoebox full of games. That when you put the two together, it was the same amount of money I just spent on the N64. So I begged my dad to take me back to Kmart, get a refund, which I did. I took it immediately right back. I just bought it. It had been less than 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It hadn't even been an hour. I returned it to the store. I went to the pawn shop. I bought the drum set, and I bought the Super Nintendo and the shoebox full of games, and that's how I got into Super Nintendo. Now, I do not like JRPGs. I'm not a fan of side-scrolling platformers, by and large. There's a few I like, but by and large, I don't like them. And I'm not a fan of puzzle games. I'm not good at them. I like action games. I like beat 'em ups. I like shooting games where you're a thing, a plane or a robot or something, where you're flying in the screen and you're shooting at stuff. I like fighting games like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter and Primal Rage and Samurai Showdown, stuff like that. Vector Man, stuff like that. So I did not have a lot of fun with the Super Nintendo. I I did play Super Mario World and enjoyed it, but not as much as I enjoyed Sonic. I did have The Legend of Zelda, Link to the Past, and while I liked that game, I had previously not been a big fan of Zelda 1 or 2 on the NES. I played them because I had them and it was like something to play, but I really couldn't get into Zelda. So I beat Zelda on the Super Nintendo. First game I ever beat, and I was happy to have beat it. And then 2000, my 18th birthday, I was working at a casino in a restaurant. I was a busser, and I was making fat money, paycheck plus tips, and I was making $50-$60 a night in tips. Now, I didn't have a car. I didn't have any bills. I lived with my parents. They were going to let me live with them for as long as I needed to. So I went to GameStop, or at the time it was Software Etc. But I went to Software Etc. And on the same day, the very, very same day, I bought, on my birthday, my 18th birthday in the year 2000, I bought a Nintendo 64 with a handful of games, and I'm not going to list the games because I don't remember them all. And I bought a Sony PlayStation and a handful of PlayStation games. The one game I remember having on PlayStation was Final Fantasy VII. The one game I remember having on N64 was Mortal Kombat Trilogy. I remember that because I also had Mortal Kombat Trilogy on PlayStation. I played them both because they were just different enough, and I was a huge Mortal Kombat fan. So I was like, cool. Final Fantasy VII was the first JRPG I ever played. Now, I played some Western RPGs. I'm into Dungeons and Dragons. So I really like that style of RPG. Dungeon crawling. That's what I like. I don't like anime. So I don't like Japanese style RPGs because they're like anime. And so I bought an N64 and I started buying games for it. And within a year, I'd gotten bored of it. I just couldn't get into it anymore. I got bored with the PlayStation. I couldn't get into it anymore. So I sold my 64, I sold my PlayStation, and I went to this local game store that doesn't exist anymore, but it did back at the time. I don't remember what it was called. And I bought a Nintendo GameCube, and I bought the Legend of Zelda Collector's Disc. Now, the reason I bought the Collector's Disc is because I thought it would have a Link to the Past on it, and it didn't, which was a bummer, because eventually Zelda 1 grew on me, but at the time I didn't like it. Zelda 2, I really didn't like. Ocarina of Time, I didn't like. And Majora's Mask, I literally just flat out hated. I was just like, no, I'm not playing Majora's Mask. And it had a demo for Wind Waker, which I was not impressed with. So I bought a GameCube. Now this is when my story starts to change, because I just went through Sega going through the Dreamcast, and they just went out of business. Or not didn't go out of business, but they left the hardware industry. They kind of went out of business, and then they got bought out by another company that saved them, but that's a whole nother complicated story. But for the purposes of this story, Sega went out of business and stopped making video game hardware. So I got a GameCube, and I loved it. I bought over 60 games for the GameCube. And I remember that because I actually had a spreadsheet and I kept track of them. And I remember when I got to 60, I was excited. So I had at least 60 games. Now, I stopped keeping track after I lost my job and I had to sell my GameCube and all my games. But I spent that 2 or 3 years with my GameCube, which is all I had it, like 2 or 3 years. It wasn't very long. And I fell in love with it. It was like the best thing ever. I bought a GBA, I bought the link cable, and I bought games that used the link cable and the cartridge, and I would play. Crystal Chronicles and Four Swords Adventures and blah blah blah. I had an e-reader, everything. I was all in. I was 100%. I had a Game Boy player. I was 100%. I was all in on GameCube. So because of that, I was excited for the Wii. So I went, stood in line, and bought a Wii on launch day. And that's where the troubles began. Every few months on the GameCube, I would read a story in a magazine about this game. I would see a preview for it, whatever game it was. And I'd be like, please God, announce it for the GameCube. And it wasn't coming to GameCube. It was PlayStation and Xbox, maybe PC. And I'd get disappointed. So I got a Wii, and I didn't even have it a day, and my parents hijacked it. Because they discovered Wii Sports, they invited their friends over, and that was that. I never played the fucking thing. I just paid $200 on a game console that my parents basically stole from me, and I never got to play it. So I was like, fuck you, Nintendo. Literally, I was just like, fine, I'll just pirate the damn games. So I downloaded the Dolphin emulator, and I downloaded the ROMs, the CD-ROM images, and I was playing GameCube and Wii games that were compatible with my mouse and keyboard, or my joystick, because I had a controller. I had a PS2 style controller with a USB port, and I would play games on my laptop, or excuse me, my desktop. I hadn't gotten a laptop yet. Then I went to college, and I switched from desktop to laptop because I needed it for school. So I got money for school. I got a Pell Grant, so I bought a laptop, and I started pirating games and playing them on the laptop. And then something happened in my personal life I'm not going to discuss here, but I had a guilty conscience about pirating, so I deleted all my pirated stuff, and I said no more pirating. And I got real nostalgic for Nintendo all of a sudden. If Sega had been making consoles at that time, I would have bought a Sega console, but because they weren't, I bought a Wii U. I paid $400 for the Wii U. I bought the deluxe edition, and it came bundled with a game, and it came with a download for another game, and a whole year subscription, or not subscription, but a whole year of bonus. It was called the Digital Plus bundle. What that meant was they had game codes, and they had Club Nintendo or My Nintendo or whatever it was called. You would put the code, you buy a game, and you had a code, and you would put it into the website, and they would give you points, and after you saved up so many points, you would buy other games. You can get free downloads on the Virtual Console or the eShop, or you can get free stuff. So I started getting free stuff and free Virtual Console and blah blah blah, and I went all in on the Wii U. And I was like, okay, cool, Minecraft on the Wii U and Super Mario 3D World. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and nothing came out for it. And I was like, still defending it. I was still hopeful. I was still pro Nintendo. I was still nostalgic for Nintendo. You know, I had warm fuzzies for Mario and Sonic, Smash Brothers and Mario Kart and stuff like that. But I realized I never really liked Smash Brothers. I hated it on the N64. I played it on the GameCube because it had that single player mode, which I thought was fun. And that's it. I didn't have it on the Wii. I bought it on the Wii U, played it a couple of times, and decided I didn't like it, and realized Smash Brothers wasn't for me, Mario Kart wasn't for me, Mario Party wasn't for me, Kirby wasn't for me, Donkey Kong wasn't. And then I'm like, why in the fuck am I buying Nintendo consoles when I don't even like their games? And I was really like depressed. I was really miserable because like I would force myself to buy a $60 game, take it home, play it for a day, and then be like, that was boring. And then something happened. In 2014, in September of 2014, I bought a PS3 Slim. It was like 105 or 109 or something like that. It was just under 120 bucks. It was like dirt cheap. PS3 Slim. It was the Ultra Slim, the one with the sliding door. The Ultra Slim with like 8 gigabytes hard drive. It was a teeny tiny little thing. And I started buying games for it. And I started buying those games that I remember wanting on the GameCube, wanting on the Wii, that I couldn't buy because they didn't exist on Nintendo. And I started having fun again. I started playing Mass Effect, and I had so much fun. And I started playing Final Fantasy, which one was it? 13. And I was like, this is cool. And I started playing, all these games, like Castlevania, Lament of Innocence, or whatever it was called. I can't remember. The Castlevania game that was on the PlayStation 3. I bought that. And I bought God of War, the trilogy, the God of War remastered collection, and I was having so much fun. And I was playing Ratchet and Clank, and I was having so much fun. And I started enjoying video games again. And I was like, why was I suffering on Nintendo consoles when PlayStation was right there the whole time? Because I didn't buy a PS2, and I didn't buy a PS3, and we're not going to even talk about Xbox. We're not even going to talk about Xbox. So, let's backtrack to handhelds. I had a Game Boy, I had a Game Boy Color, I got a GBA, I got a Nintendo DS. I couldn't afford a 3DS because they were really expensive, and I just threw all that money into the Wii U. The time came, I pre-ordered and got on launch day a Nintendo Switch. And I got ARMS. And I was like, okay, this is fun. And then the long story short, every game that was announced, that was a Wii U game. That was a Wii U game. That was a Wii U game. That was a PS3 game. That's a PS3 game. That's a PS3 game. That's a Super Nintendo game. That's a Nintendo 64 game. That's a Super Nintendo game. And eventually I was like, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I suffering through another Nintendo console with no fucking games that I like? There's nothing on it that I want to play, when I have a perfectly good PS3 just sitting right there. And so November, Black Friday 2014, I went into Walmart and I bought $400, bought a PS4. This was still current gen at the time. This was just before PS4 Pro came out, so it was still current gen. And I am not going to list off all the games I bought for it, but needless to say, I started buying games for it, and once again, I was blown away. I was having fun again. The most fun game I had was Diablo 3 and Minecraft. No, Minecraft was on the Switch, but the PS4 version was a little bit better. But I didn't have Minecraft on the Switch. I did have it on the Wii U, but it was really clunky and kind of sucky. I'll admit, it wasn't very playable. But I really got into Diablo 4 and Minecraft and Mortal Kombat X and a bunch of other games. And I realized I was having fun again. And so I swore off Nintendo. And at first it was just, you know what, I'm done with Nintendo. I sold the Switch, I sold the Wii U. Well, actually my Wii U got stolen, but I sold my Wii U games. Because they stole the Wii U, but they didn't steal the games, which was weird. My Wii U got stolen, so I was like, good riddance. I sold my Switch. I paid $350 for the Switch, brand new, and I bought a couple games with it. I sold my Switch used with like 3 games for $750. This was in the middle of COVID when those things were sky high. So I made a damn profit, a big ass profit selling the Switch. So I was like, good riddance. And that's when I realized I had put up with all the bullshit Nintendo was doing. I had put up with the cartridges on the N64. I had put up with the mini DVDs on the GameCube and not being online when all my friends were online. I put up with that waggle wand. I put up with that fucking Wii U whatever monstrosity. And I realized I was done putting up with Nintendo. I was over it. I was finished with them. And so not only did I swear I would never give them another dime for as long as I live, but I would go out of my way to let people know that I hate them, why I hate them, and why I will never respect that company again. Most of it is because they shat on third-party developers in the NES days and soured all those relationships that they have never mended to this day. They've never made friends with those companies that left them. Oh, they would get a token game here and there from time to time, but it was usually like an off game, like a spin-off or something. It was never the game that everybody else got. And I got sick of that. Now, I could sit here as a socialist. I could talk about their capitalist ways and how evil they are, blah, 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 blah. But I could also do the same thing for Sony. I could do the same thing for Microsoft. I could do the same thing for Apple. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to sit here and shit on Nintendo because they're capitalists. And they're very, very, very anti-consumer. More anti-consumer than the other guys. But that's another story for another day. But it boils down to I just got sick and tired of wasting money on a machine that couldn't play games I wanted to play, and wasting money on games I did not enjoy. I just got fed up with it. And so I decided I'm done with Nintendo. And that is where I am now. I actively hate them as a company. I will not buy the Switch Pro or 2 or Super Switch or whatever it's fucking called. I will not buy a used Switch. I will never give Nintendo another dime. I have reverted to my previous stance of sailing the high seas and playing Nintendo games on my laptop. But it's mostly third-party games that I grew up with. Mortal Kombat, Mega Man, Castlevania, stuff like that I grew up with. Super Nintendo games. Or games that I have fond memories of. And it's only a handful of games. I don't have like a folder full of ROMs. I've got like a handful of games. Games that I bought back in the day, paid full price retail for, so Nintendo got my money, bought on the Virtual Console, bought on the Wii U Virtual Console. I gave Nintendo, Capcom, Konami, Namco, I gave them the money more than once for these games. I feel justified in having the Super Nintendo ROM on my laptop, and I'm not going to feel guilty about it. I'm not going to tell you how to get them. And I'm not going to tell you to do it. I'm just going to say my piece and leave it at that. Leave a comment down below. Let me know if you're also jaded by Nintendo. Or if you're one of those people who's continuing to put up with their bullshit. Or maybe you actually like their games. If you like their games, good for you. I do not like Animal Crossing. I do not like Pikmin. I do not like Splatoon. I do not like Donkey Kong. I do not like Kirby. I do not like Smash Brothers. I just don't. There's nothing Nintendo makes that I look at and go, ooh, I want to play that. Not enough. Maybe Mario Odyssey was fun, ARMS was fun, just not enough for me to justify investing in a Nintendo ecosystem ever again. I'd be happier if Nintendo went third party and then I can get the 5 games that they make that I like on my PlayStation or my PC. That's never going to happen, realistically, I know. But I can dream. That's the only way I would ever buy a Nintendo game again, is if it was on released on PlayStation. Now, to finish this off, I'm 41 years old. I suffer with depression, anxiety, PTSD, and a bunch of other mental illnesses. I play video games for fun as escapism, but I don't have a lot of money. And most modern games don't really appeal to me that much anymore. So I've decided, for me personally, I'm sticking with the 4 PlayStations I own. I own PS1, PS2, PS3, PS4. That's it. I'm never going to buy another used console. I'm never going to buy another new console. I'm just going to spend the rest of my life buying games for these consoles until they stop working. And then I'll be dead, because I won't care at that point. So my PS4 is my primary console. It's my forever console. I just bought a game for it. I'm not going to show it to you because I don't know where it is. But I'm going to focus on slowly, gradually building up my PlayStation 4 library by selectively buying games I know I'll enjoy. Or hope I'll enjoy. Or I'm very likely to enjoy. And I'm going to put Nintendo in the past where they belong. Thank you.